I assume Anna might join us at some point, but okay, so it is Thursday night, April 12th, and thanks to Greg, Jinda, and Ruba for joining me. The goal for tonight was really just to look through some examples of final papers and the final briefings. As I indicated, if you haven't had a chance yet to look at the new learning unit, it's basically really our final unit in terms of readings and things like that, because over this next couple weeks, you're just working on basically compiling your evidence and really doing your detailed analysis. And then on the week of the 25th, you'll be doing your briefings, and then you'll do a draft of your final paper that will go for peer review, and that will then be followed. Whoops. Ruba, do you have me on speaker? Somebody has us on speaker. Okay. Did somebody just change their audio?
I didn't. But
Jinda, I think it's actually coming from you. Your audio is showing it.
Oh, is
there? Okay. I don't know what happened, Jinda, but if you have a question, just pop back in, and then when I'm talking, maybe just go on mute. But so I just want to quickly pull up the syllabus again, just to remind everyone of where we are in the schedule. And so we're basically at the end here. So we're in this Unit 9, pulling it all together. I'm just going to expand this a bit so you can see it. So the readings are here, and I've posted them obviously on Blackboard. And you'll have this discussion board. I changed the dates from the syllabus for what's due this week because I wanted to move up the date of the discussion board so you have more time to work on your presentations. So the syllabus dates for the discussion board are off. Go by what's on the Blackboard site under the learning unit. But so once we get through these next 2 weeks where you're compiling your evidence, your presentations will be doing, I'm debating bumping the date by a few days just to give you a few extra days to pull together your final presentations. And then we'll do a final draft peer review of the papers. The way that peer review works is each one of you will be assigned one of your peers' final draft papers to thoroughly review. And you will be basically using a rubric like I use to grade the papers, but there'll be sections to comment on every component of the paper. So you'll be able to provide your colleague with detailed feedback. Students have said in the past that this is extremely helpful and really helps them improve the final quality of the paper. The nice thing is you'll basically be getting 2 sets of feedback before your final paper is actually due on May 10th. You're going to get feedback from your final presentation, but then you'll also get your peer feedback from your colleague on the draft paper itself. So any of you who maybe struggled a little bit with the first paper, you have plenty of more opportunities to get some really good feedback before you turn in the final paper.
And I just have a quick question there.
Sure.
You said that you'll supply a rubric because, yeah, I think that'll be very helpful.
Yep, I always, as you know, Greg, I always provide a rubric and instructions for all my assignments. So there's actually going to be a form that you're going to fill out for the peer review. It'll have very specific questions in it, and I'll ask you to basically go through like a checklist. And does this person address this? Do they address this? And there's going to be room for you to provide comments and input on everything.
Okay, because when I was looking through the syllabus, several days ago, yeah, I was a little concerned about that, oh, geez, I'm a student. I'm still kind of a student in this. And, I wasn't confident that I would be able to provide that great of feedback.
Yeah, no, you will. Okay, the feedback you're going to be providing is going to be application of all the material from the course. You get graded on your review. The person doesn't get graded on their draft paper, if that makes sense. So, yeah. the review is, it takes time to do it properly and to do it thoughtfully. And, you want to put as much effort into it as you want somebody put effort into the review of your paper. So, I allow several days for this. Like, the benefit of doing this online for the online course versus the in-person, for the in-person course, they basically just have 1 3-hour setting to sit down, read the paper, and do the review. For the online course, you guys get more time to take some time to really go through it. So that's one of the few upsides to this class being online. So you'll be looking forward to receiving that. You'll be getting that peer review guide during the week of the 25th.
And it looks like, according to what you have on the screen, it looks like our drafts are due on May 2nd, and then the feedback is due on May 5th.
Correct, because that way it gives you guys about 3 days to review. I can't extend those dates because I want each of you to have plenty of time to make revisions to your paper before the final paper is due on the 10th. And I won't be able to accept any late papers because actually I extended out as far as I possibly could because grades are due the following Wednesday. So I want to make sure that I have plenty of time to do the final grades. But I'm probably going to give you another day or two on for doing the briefings just so that people have a little bit of extra time for the evidence review. Okay, any questions about that schedule stuff? And as always, it'll be documented in Blackboard. Ruba, are you okay? Yep. And Jinda, if you want to just text in the comment box or chat box to see if you have any questions. Okay, great. All right, well, I'm going to go back. So I'm just going to go back to the learning unit again just to refresh us on the schedule. So this first week of the learning unit, you really want to spend time getting through those readings. And then we're going to walk through right now the model papers, but I bolded here thoroughly. Really review the model final papers. The people who tended to struggle a bit with the first paper may not have really understood the implications of those model papers. They really do provide really good examples of what I consider to be an A paper. Most of them have little things here and there. Like I was going over one of the papers with one of your classmates yesterday and noted that some of their reference formatting was off and things like that. And I'm sure I commented on it for them for their paper. But the structure, the content, things like that in those model papers are A quality papers. So sometimes I get absolutely perfect papers and it's lovely, but usually there's going to be a little thing here or there. But for the intent and purposes of these being models, it's the content and the level of detail that I'm really looking for as models here. Okay. Although be mindful that each semester I slightly tweak the structure of the paper or the content expectations. So the instructions that I will post over the weekend for the final paper and briefings in terms of what my content expectations are and things like that, that will, I don't want to use this word, that will trump the model papers. So if you're not sure about structure or format, go with the instructions over the models. The other big thing, though, besides doing the readings and reviewing the models, is really to be spending all your time working on researching the evidence to populate your analysis. And we're going to look at some of that today. And then next week, you'll be to continue to do your evidence analysis. The one activity for the week is just to participate in the discussion board. So after you've done the readings, you've looked at the models, then I want you to just do some internet research to try and find examples of a policy analysis from an organization. It could be from like the Cagle Institute, Brookings, Commonwealth Fund, Kaiser Family Foundation, Congressional Research Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture. It could be from anywhere, but some type of policy analysis. And your goal will be to post that model to the Blackboard discussion site, and then you'll critique it basically and indicate how what you found compares to what you've been learning about this semester in terms of the structure, the content, the presentation, the format, basically giving you an opportunity to apply what you've been learning to real world application. Any questions about that? So that is obviously going to be under the Learning Unit 9, but it's also here in a separate discussion board. And as with the last discussion board, you'll be asked to create a thread first, and then once you've created your thread, you'll be able to see other people's threads. Okay? All right, great. So what I wanted to really spend our time on today was looking at some of these models. I'm going to actually start by just showing you the model briefing, and I'll post some models from last semester as well. The one thing I will note about these model briefings, and please be mindful of it, these were all from my in-person course, so none of them will have any audio overlay in them. So when you look at the models, you're going to look at them more for content, but they won't have the audio overlay that you'll be expected to provide. Sorry, Ruba just asked a question, and I think her question was about, I'm not sure if it's, sorry, Ruba, can you come back on because I don't know what the question is. Can you type a more complete question?
I'm wondering if she was asking when the model paper that we find, like you said, from either Kaiser Permanente or Cato, and that we post, when that is due.
It says it all right here.
It's right there.
Yeah.
April 7th.
It's all right here in the discussion board, and it's also listed in the learning unit. So you have to post your initial post by Tuesday, the 17th, and then you'll have until the 21st to provide comments back. So I changed the date from the syllabus, Ruba. Okay. Okay, you're welcome. So where was I? The models. So for the model briefings, when you look at them, you'll look at them for the content of the slides, but as with your initial presentations you all did, you're going to add in your audio overlay. I actually found on the UIC ACC website, they have a really nice, simple tutorial on how to record audio, even easier than some of the instructions I provided previously. So I will post those as well for you. It shows you, and the nice thing is that you can then create it into a video very simply. I'm just going to show you right here. You'll go to File, and you'll go to, it's either Save As or Export. It's going to be Export, I think. You're going to do File, Export, Create a Video, and it'll create it right into a video for you. And then you can embed the video into the Blackboard site, or you can post it to YouTube and embed the YouTube link. So that'll probably be a lot easier for some of you than trying to just post your PowerPoint slides, okay?
And I'm wondering, does that, when you do this create a video, does it allow you, like, for example, if we want to edit it, or we, want to just back up and re-record it? Do you know if it allows you to do that?
Well, you'll still do that all in PowerPoint. So you'll still do everything in PowerPoint. You'll still do your individual slides and your individual slide overlays with your audio. So you'll be able to insert your audio and delete your audio just like you did last time, Greg. But then once you're done with your whole presentation, so if you don't like the audio on a slide, you can delete it and replace the audio on that slide. Once you're done with your whole presentation with the audio in it, you'll save it, and then you'll go to File, Export, Create a Video. So that's just the end point after you're done. What happened last time is LiveView, pretty much everyone just posted a PowerPoint file with the audio in it, but then people had to click on each slide to play the audio to hear it. This will create it as one streaming video, so we don't have that, fumble, having a fumble through the presentations.
Okay, so just I just want to make sure I understand. So we still record the video inside PowerPoint, but what you just showed us file, export, create video. That's
at the end. After you're done creating your whole presentation in PowerPoint, you add your audio in PowerPoint just like you did last time. You save your file just like you would any other PowerPoint file. Once you're done saving it, though, you'll then do create video. And I'm going to post, Jinda, I'm going to post the instructions from the ACC to Blackboard, so you'll have the link for it, okay? And that Greg will explain this further, so I don't think we need to talk about it more. Once you see them, if you have any questions, there's a link there for the ACC that you can send a question to. Okay? Okay, so I'm just going to pull up a couple models from fall of 16, but I'll also post some models from last semester. So basically the briefings will have all the components of your final paper. So everything from soup to nuts. So, the data, just like you did in your initial paper, and like if a lot of the background stuff is the same from your initial presentation, you can certainly reuse it again. There's no worry about that. But most of this will come straight out of your paper, the graphics and tables and things like that. And then for stakeholders, one of the things I always recommend with presentations is to use logos. It just adds some visual appeal to the presentations. I'll show you some others in a minute. This is her slide to talk about different policy landscape factors. The one thing I mentioned this to another student yesterday, one problem with this presentation was that she neglected to put her sources on every slide. So you need to have sources on every slide, and I'll show you that with another one. But the content of her presentation was quite good. She had talking points, of course, just like your speaker's notes that get through everything. So you'll want to do that. And then here's where she talks about her criteria and how they're going to be evaluated. She created the scale for evaluating them. And then she had a separate slide on each one of the status quo and each one of the policy options. And then she rated them. And so on and so forth. And then in the end, she had a summary, she had a summary, simple summary side-by-side table, and then she ended with her recommendation. There's going to be slightly different for what you guys are going to do at the end of the presentation. I'm going to ask you to include a closing section about key takeaways from the course, what you learned from the course, things that you would like for future classes to know. I did that last semester. It worked really nicely. This is another presentation. She studied the youth cigarette smoking problem in West Virginia, and her client was a legislative client. And so she started with a brief explanation of her problem. She did correctly cite throughout her presentation. She had more detail on the problem to highlight certain things she wanted to talk about. She bolded them. Again, she included data tables and figures. These are her sources, references here for her reference list, so on and so forth. This was a really nice slide, a really nice way to present the policy landscape. So she had a separate box for each of the key factors and then discussed the major highlights. Really simple, easy to follow. Same with market failures. She had 2 columns for each set of market failures and explained them again. She cited to sources throughout to back up all the points she was making. This was what I was talking about earlier. It's really nice to have key stakeholders. I really like this format of the ones who are supportive of your issue and those who might be in opposition. You want to think broad. You want to think about the supporters and the opposition groups. She then goes into detail on each one of her alternatives, starting with the status quo. And then she described each alternative before she went to her criteria or goals. She defined each one. She also did a ranking system, which I strongly encourage everyone to do. And then she created this table for each alternative that evaluates each alternative by the goals and criteria. And this is basically almost out of her paper. Sometimes she pared it down a little bit, but she has all of her citations in here from her paper and things like that. And she did that for each one of the alternatives. And then in the end, she had a summary table indicating which alternative she ended up recommending and explained why in detail. And then this is all of her endnotes and references. So that one is really an exemplar. Whoops. That one was really an exemplar presentation. That's probably like a A+ type of presentation. This is a third.
Can I interrupt a second?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I agree. That was very impressive. I guess I'm kind of looking at the calendar, and well, I have two.
Well, let me just finish getting through this, Greg, and then
okay, all right.
Okay. Everything you all should be working on, right? Like the first half of your paper covers all those initial slides, so that shouldn't be new. And everything you should be working on right now is all the evidence. So they had the same amount of time that you guys have to pull together their evidence. So, so if I know where you're going, I'm not sure I'll agree. So let me go through this one. This one was looking at mental health services amongst African Americans. She prepared it for a member of Congress. Something formatting is going on funny with this one when I'm pulling up now, but she has sort of a table of contents for her presentation. She goes through all the background data, figures, tables. This is an area that a lot of you relax on with your papers, not necessarily paying attention to the full instructions, but everybody is required to have at least one figure and at least one table. What's really striking about the figures in their presentations is how easy they are to follow and read. They're not blurry. You can tell that they either redid the figures or they pulled in a high quality figure. She then went into the market failures, explained them, the government failures, explained what they were and why. Again, the stakeholders. She had multiple sets of stakeholders. So the first one were government agencies and other organizations, and then she had elected officials because her paper was for a member of Congress. She talked about each of her status quo and her three alternatives, her criteria. And then so what she did actually in the presentation was she actually orally described each of the alternatives rather than having a slide for each one. She then described each of the criteria, and then she too had a table. This one also was lacking the citations, so I noted that for her. So this one, Greg, gets at the exact same things as the prior presentation. It doesn't have as much detail in it. It's probably like an A to a low A paper presentation compared to the A+ of the last one I showed you. But I would not accept now not having citations. So just be mindful of that. But then she had a summary table at the end and made her recommendation. I explained it all. She did a lot less in terms of the slides and a lot more in terms of her explanation to go along with her slides. But that gives you sort of a hybrid in between example. But I have about 2 or 3 examples from last semester that I'll also be posting. So all of the presentation stuff feeds right into the papers themselves and what the expectations are. And hopefully by now, throughout the semester, you've been looking at the models, but I'm going to start with the class models as opposed to the Weimer and Vining model. So on the Blackboard site under model papers, there's 2 now that I posted. I'll post some from fall as well on model final papers. So this one, she was studying MRSA infections, and her client was for HHS. table of contents, two-page executive summary, actually one-page executive summary, and then follows the same format as the paper one with the background section, the landscape, the government and market failures, the criteria, and then the analysis. So this first paragraph of the analysis is basically what you all have or are working on from your paper one. That's a detailed explanation of each of the alternatives. And then the analysis goes into detail for each one of the goals or criteria to explain the evidence to support the analysis of that alternative against the goals or criteria. And as you can see, everything is cited to sources. She also created a scale, which I strongly recommend. Under her criteria, besides describing them, she said that each criterion will be ranked high, intermediate, or low. With high meaning there's a great likelihood of benefit, intermediate, some are neutral, and low meaning less. So easy way to kind of differentiate, because if you don't put these qualifiers in with your analysis, it's a little hard to know for sure what you're saying, like where is it relatively speaking. In the presentations, people were using like the stoplight red, yellow, and green color schemes to indicate low, medium, and high, for example. So she does this for each one. So for each one, she has her detailed paragraph on explaining the alternative, and then she goes into each one of her goals or impact categories and provides the evidence to back it up. So I strongly encourage you to look at these model final papers. I'll post a couple more tomorrow from the Fall 17 class. This one was on long-acting reversible contraception, Illinois, and this was done for a member of the Illinois General Assembly. And she, again, a one-page executive summary. And then, now mind you, the papers from spring of 17 I made shorter. Last semester, I allowed students like you 5 pages for the initial paper. And so I was going to make the final paper about 7.5 pages, and they barked. So I allowed up to 10 pages, I think, for the final paper. So these papers are shorter than what you all are allowed to do. So she also had her background section, the landscape, the rationale for action, her analysis of her alternatives. She also used a ranking scale of high, medium, or low. And then what she did was she actually, she did the same thing. She described each alternative. So basically coming straight out of your paper one, the description of each alternative. She had 2 paragraphs here, and then or 3. And then she went into the analysis of each alternative using her goals and impact categories. Okay. There are a couple of other examples that I'll post tomorrow. One thing I do want to bring to your attention, for each alternative, there's like a good qualitative explanation of the alternative. It doesn't just say alternative 3, but it's actually a meaningful like subheader of what it is, so that it's easy to follow along. Then she had a recommendation, her references, her figures. She did a stakeholder table, and then a side-by-side table. And this is kind of along the lines of what you'll be expected to do, which is providing some explanation to go along with the high, medium, and low rankings. And again, citing to your sources. So it differentiates this from the presentation. In the presentation, you're not expected to have all this text in there, but in the paper, you want to do sort of a compiled short side-by-side analysis. Okay, so Greg, now I'll take your question.
So, I'm just kind of trying to get in my head everything that's got to be done over the next, I guess, 4 weeks. So there's doing the research, getting more evidence. There's creating the briefing or the presentation, and then there's the assignment that to go out and find a model paper out there in the press somewhere.
Not in the press. It's not going to be in the press. It's going to be from like an organization.
From an organization. And then there's obviously preparing the draft paper, submitting that to Blackboard, and then there'll be, I think you said probably it takes around 3 hours to provide feedback to whoever you assign us.
In my class, in the in-person class, I only allow them 3 hours. That's all the time we have in the class session. You guys get 3 days to provide feedback.
Right, but I guess there's
it's just a matter of how much time. I don't think we had
3 days to do it.
No, I mean, it's a matter of how much time you want to put in. You'll get graded on the feedback you provide. So, if you don't put in much feedback, it doesn't help your classmate, and your grade will reflect that. So it's just a question of, honestly, Greg, I mean, this is what every course, every semester, every student has ever done, and it's never been a problem. And actually, what you'll see is once you pull your evidence together, and most of you did a really good job with your first paper. So half of your presentation, half of your paper are already done, if actually more than half. Because all you're doing now is pulling the evidence together. That's all you're doing. So spending 2 weeks on pulling evidence together should be more than enough, because there's nothing else assigned other than this one discussion board. So that should not be a problem, because then putting the presentation together helps you in conceptualizing what your paper's going to look like. It's always worked really well for everyone. I've never had a complaint about it. And the presentations, you'll get detailed feedback from me as well as from at least one classmate to provide you feedback to go into your draft paper. And students always find that helpful as well. So those check-in points of the briefing and the peer review are to help improve the quality of the final paper so that the final paper is the best that it can be.
Looks like Ruba has a question.
Ruba, I haven't posted the final guide. I have to look at what I had posted for last semester, but I think I let it be up to 10 pages. Jinda, do you have any questions? Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to show you on Blackboard is from Weimer and Vining. Now remember, the problem with Weimer and Vining models is that they don't include citations in their example chapters. So they're good models for purposes of organization and structure, but remember, I'm sort of a stickler about citing to sources. These are not papers that are your own thoughts and your personal opinion and things that you've come up with on your own. These are supposed to be research evidence-based objective analyses. So I do expect the evidence review to be really based on evidence that you've identified through your research, as I've said throughout the semester. So all the papers will start, as you saw in the models from the class, they'll all start with an executive summary. I'll provide detailing instructions about the length of the executive summary, but the one thing that you'll note is that the executive summary is to cover all aspects of the paper. So it'll hone in briefly on what the problem is, the strategies that are being considered, what the current policy is, the strategies being considered for addressing the problem, and then the goals and impact categories. And then as you see here, it says, based on the assessment, the analysis concludes the following, that this should happen. And then not only do they say what should happen, but they explain why the other alternatives are not selected. And that's what you'll do in your papers too. So then in this model from chapter 16, Weimer and Vining, they go on further to, they have the introduction to the full paper. They go into background and, have their data tables and all that. They talk about the economic issues. This one, you might recall from earlier in the semester, the Chapter 9 mini policy analysis on the Madison taxi cab, that was a much better example for the application of market and government failures. But all of you have already seen that, and most of you were successful in applying that in paper 1. So I'm not worried about that. So I'm going to skip over all this background stuff that's already in your paper 1. So what I want to get to is down here. So they have the policy goals, which many of you modeled after, which was great. And then they have their alternatives. So starting here on page 389 in Weimer and Vining, they have the comparison of the alternatives. So you might recall from the models I showed you from prior class, what each of those people did was they described the alternative. They provided their paragraph description of the alternative and then went into the analysis. And this Weimer and Vining model, they did it a little bit differently. They did it like you did for your paper, where they have a section on each alternative description. And then in the analysis, it's strictly just the analysis of the alternatives by the goals. So the current policy is the status quo. So their first goal or impact category is efficiency. Then they go into preservation, equity, and political feasibility. Again, they have lots of detail here, very little in the way of citations. So use the models from my class for understanding the expectations relative to sourcing and things like that. It really is intended to be a research paper. Sorry, Ruba, for the research paper, for the policy example, we will research and critique what is the page limit. Oh, you mean the policy example for the discussion board? No, you're not going to. I want you to focus on the methods and the content of the examples for the discussion board posting in terms of not the topical content, but in terms of the components of their policy analysis. A lot of the ones you may find may not address market and government failures, and like what's the downfall of not addressing them? Well, the whole rationale for market and government, the whole rationale for policy intervention is because there's a market or government failure. So if a policy analysis doesn't address it, then they're not really helping to make the case. Likewise, maybe it's a very biased policy analysis developed for an organization with a specific leaning or bent. You'll be able to talk about what that bias means in terms of the analysis, in terms of whether it's a balanced analysis or not, things like that. That's what I'm looking for in the review of the models that you might post on the discussion board this week. Does that help? I hope that, hold on, let's just see. Okay, I'm assuming that was okay. Okay, and then Jinda, the executive summary, I'll let you know it's all going to be in the instructions. Everything you need to know will be in the instructions. So I change it from year to year in terms of line spacing and length and things like that. So I don't want to commit on the video yet until I have it written. Okay, so basically back to the example here from Weimer and Vining. So for each of the alternatives, they go provide the evidence to support each of the goals. They go through each one, and that's what you'll be doing. And then they, at the end, they sort of do their final assessment and recommendation, and they have a simple side-by-side matrix that they have here, and it's very similar to the one I showed you before. Again, the only difference is they don't put citations in theirs. When we were talking about goals and impacts a couple weeks ago, I showed you this particular table in chapter 16 as like a model, and that is exactly how I would set it up. Many of you did goals and impact categories, which I was really excited about. So this table 1 here in this appendix in chapter 16 of Weimer and Vining is a perfect example for you for your side-by-side summary table. And you could follow the exact same model for your briefing. You just don't have to provide all this text detail in here. And as you saw from the models that I provided on Blackboard, a nice way to make it visually stand out in terms of the strength of the ratings or the strength of the evidence is using colors or symbols or check boxes or things like that. Any questions? Greg, since you're my only audio person, any questions from you?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Jinder Aruba, any questions from you? Okay. Let me just see what else I wanted to show you here. Oh, so the one thing I do want to call out in the assessment is in the final recommendation, not only do you actually make a final recommendation, but you have to explain why you chose that over the other ones. It should be self-explanatory from your analysis and from the side-by-side table, but I want you to communicate that. So you'll see in the model papers and in this model from Weimer and Vining how they do that. And again, when you're reviewing these models, you're not reviewing them so much for the topical content in these papers at all. It's more about just understanding how did they present this. Some of you commented to me that for your paper ones, it was really helpful to look at the models because it helped you figure out how best to explicate what you were trying to say. And so that's why I provide these models. The models that I'll post from last semester are even stronger than the ones from last year that I've posted. So they seem to get better every year. So you'll see those popping up in the next day or so. Any questions? Let me just see. Jinder, Ruba, all clear. Okay. Yeah, so at this point, I'll just open it up to see if anybody has any questions about their evidence review that they're doing or their searches. Anything I can help with at this point. Oh, I will tell you that the presentations, you'll be limited to a 15-minute briefing, just as if you were giving it in class. So it's much longer than the many presentations that you gave for at the beginning of the semester. So you'll have plenty of time to explicate what you're trying to say. So any questions about the evidence review or research that you're doing for your own papers? Any challenges you're having? Anything, lessons you want to share with people?
Not for me.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, Ruba or Jinder, do you have any other questions you have for me at this point? Otherwise, we'll just, I guess, end the session.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, hold on one second. Thank you. Oh, yeah, no problem, Jinder. If you guys have any questions, just shoot me an email and I will get back to you or we can jump on a quick call. Okay? All right, well, I hope everybody has a great night and I will obviously post the recording as soon as it finishes converting.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you.